Hi, I'm Rabbi Baruch, also known as Rabbi B, and welcome to Soul Centered. Soul Centered is a center for loss, for meaning, for healing. We're based in Denver, Colorado. I co-founded it with my wife, Ariella, but we work with people around the world. We offer counseling around loss, meaning, and healing. I work with people specifically around loss and particularly around loss after a loved one, but also meaning. I'm a student of Dr. Viktor Frankl, who we'll be talking about, and logotherapy, meaning-centered therapy, direction, guidance, and Ariella focuses on healing of all types. We also offer soul-centered experiences, and this is a soul-centered experience. It's the third in a series of videos that has been inspired by Karen Gustafson and Jewish Family Service in Omaha, Nebraska. She and I were talking a while back about ways that I could connect. I grew up in Omaha and very much has informed who I am as a person, as a man, as a rabbi, and I wanted to give back. And we were talking about reaching out to folks during a time of desperation and giving them inspiration. And I hope this is inspirational and just gives you a little bit of light during a time of darkness. And this video series has really turned into kind of a journey of memory and remembering. So the first one, remembering the American way, the second one, remembering the Jewish way, and the third one, this one, remembering the Holocaust. Both because it's important to remember the Holocaust, we'll talk about that, but also because it can transform our lives collectively and individually. And now more than ever before, we need that type of transformation. So growing up, I didn't connect with Judaism, certainly not the religious aspect, but I always identified as a Jew, and particularly because of the Holocaust narrative. I remember being transfixed in Hebrew school, learning about the Holocaust, realizing it was only 30 plus years at that point since the greatest atrocity in human history, right? The most calculated extermination of a people, my people, we were just barely in the shadows. We still are barely in the shadows of it. I also grew up knowing just how close to home it was. My grandfather fought for the Americans, liberated a concentration camp. I used to wear his helmet and his jacket and play soldier and fight the Nazis, the bad guys. I always felt so much, hope and inspiration turning to comic books because the original comic book villains were the Nazis, and Superman and Spider-Man would fight against these Nazis, right? All created by Jewish people wanting to combat the horrors of the Holocaust, each of us in our own way grappling with it at an identity level. And it impacted me deeply. Never again is what we say. And it became a mantra and a mission of mine to take this message of never again to the world. And I have been, like so many others, for 20 some years now for myself. And it's about being strong and having a strong presence to resist the evil that is out in the world, to fight the evil that's out in the world. And so I believe we need a strong state of Israel and a strong state of America and all of these important reasons to say never again and translate it into action. And not just action out in the world, but each of us. Never again and never forgetting. We cannot forget. We must not forget. And yet the world is forgetting. So many Holocaust deniers, but even beyond Holocaust deniers, just simple folks who don't know. That's why we need Holocaust education in all types of places. And it's not always just us Jews standing up for ourselves. It's using never again as a pathway to say never again for any atrocity, to defend all kinds of people against anything remotely like this ever happening again. So it's important, and we must keep that going. So advocate for Holocaust education in your state, in your community. And there's so many great programs out there right now. And we'll talk more about that probably on the next video, because it's going to turn into a conversation about legacy. But I also want to take it to the next level, because for me, never again is only half the equation. Never again and never forget. And yeah, never. It's important. But what about always? Isn't there an always to take away from this conversation? For me, there was. Part of my identity is never forget and never again. But part of it is always remember. Back to last week's conversation, always remember, the number one commandment in the Bible, in the Torah. Remember the orphan, the widow, the stranger. Remember those who came before you, right? Remember for the lessons learned. Passover just finished. We take that message not only about the atrocities that happened to our people, but also the examples of heroism, of courage, of resilience. Not just Passover, but the Holocaust. So many examples of survivors coming out of the Holocaust, transformed, of course, for the worse, watching their families murdered and the experiences they suffered in concentration and death camps, but also the examples of courage and resilience. Elie Wiesel, read his book Night. Anne Frank, of course, read her diary. Study their examples. Simon Wiesenthal coming out and fighting Nazis, spending his life devoted to hunting down Nazis. Primo Levi, Edith Egger. Do you know Edith? She's still living, thank God. She's an amazing example of what's possible. Wrote a book called The Choice. We always have a choice. Student of Dr. Viktor Frankl and Dr. Viktor Frankl, my hero. This is a man who, like so many others, faced hell, and yet he didn't lose his essential self, his optimism, his hope, his commitment to meaning. And what he says is the rest of his life, the meaning of his life, was helping other people find meaning. That's why he established logotherapy, meaning-centered therapy, and he lived his life taking the examples that he experienced in the Holocaust to help transform other people's lives. And he said in Man's Search for Meaning, if you haven't read it, it's a must-read, top 10 Library of Congress book of all time. He wrote, "We who lived in the concentration camps can remember the men and the women who walked through the huts, comforting others, giving away their last piece of bread. They may have been few in number, but they offer sufficient proof that everything can be taken from a person except one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose one's way." He took away from the Holocaust, yes, never again, and yes, never forget, but yes, also always remember that in the midst of hell, we can still be decent. We can still be good. We can still find beauty and blessings and promise and possibility and hope. And that is positive. And that is something we must always remember. And that must be brought to the world around us. We can teach character to young people who need character education like never before. We can teach resiliency training based on what these examples show us coming out of the Holocaust. We can teach about faith and hope. Right, next week we go into the holy day of Yom HaZikaron, Memorial Day, and in Israel it's heartbreaking, and people are they're just shattered because everybody knows somebody who died in a war. And that night, you come out of it and you celebrate. Why? Because it's Israel's Independence Day, Yom HaAtzmaut, and you erupt in celebration. We are people who go from darkness to light, from desperation to inspiration. And it comes back down to we always have a choice. There are great, mighty lessons that can be extracted from the show-off, from the Holocaust, that must be instilled in young people, Jewish, Christian, secular, it doesn't matter. We need to bring this type of education to the world today. We must, yes, continue to say never again and fight for never again for the Jewish people and for any people. And we must never forget, and it begins with never forgetting, but we must always remember these examples and this legacy and this message that we can choose the last of our human freedoms, to choose our attitude in any given set of circumstances, to choose our way, to choose to remember, to choose light over darkness during these difficult, painful, devastating times, to choose inspiration when feels like all we want to choose is desperation, to choose hope over despair. These are also the messages and the mission that we need to bring with us from the Holocaust and to the world today. So never again and never forget, but always remember, stay safe. Don't lose your hope. Don't lose your optimism. Don't lose your sense of possibility, because there's always possibility. There's always hope. God bless. Take care. And I'll see you in the next video.